Good afternoon. Are you all ready for this exciting session? Yay, okay. My name is Jennifer Taylor, and at Florida A&M University, I'm coordinator of small farm programs. We have an excellent session planned for you today. Chip Osborne is a nationally renowned organic turf grass expert and a professional horticulturalist with 35 years experience in greenhouse production. As a former owner and operator of Osborne Florists and Greenhouse in Marblehead, Maine. His personal investigation, study of conventional and organic soil science practices, and hands-on experimentation led him to become one of the country's leading experts on growing organic turf. Chip Osborne is also a board member of Beyond Pesticides. Thank you. Let us welcome Chip. Thank you.
All right, well, good afternoon. So this is going to be a discussion about alternatives. So, we've heard the problem this morning, identified that we have a problem. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here in the room. And we're going to sort of walk through different scenarios here where people are really on the cutting edge of coming up with alternative strategies. My focus, as you heard, is the managed landscape. So I work within, not just that organic lawn, but although that is important. I mean, that is a place where children play and are exposed to significant pesticides. American homeowners account for probably the largest amount of pesticides used in sort of the non-ag sector. But most importantly, the playing fields, public parks, golf courses, those areas that historically have had significant impact. What I'm going to do is not so much focus on that that aspect, but more or less set the stage for you today on what it means, what organic means, what organic management means, a little bit about what conventional management is, and then how the rest of the speakers that follow me will, really show you the strategies that they've taken to begin to get away from that conventional approach and come up with natural alternatives. I'll say right out, when you hear Lani after me, she's out in the western part of the country. I'm in the east. She's using goats to manage landscapes. I'm using aerators and bags of fertilizer. And we do exactly the same thing because it's all about creating a system. My system happens to be the managed landscape. Her system is more open space and natural lands. So why go organic or alternative? We can call it organic management. We can call it alternative management. Ultimately, the goal is to reduce and eliminate toxic pesticides, reduce and eliminate synthetic fertilizers. Make no mistake, synthetic fertilizers create a dependence upon toxic pesticides. They are not unrelated. They were marketed together in post-World War II. First, the control product to kill that weed. If we're looking at a residential landscape or a public park, like in my focus, clover was there. Clover's a great plant. Clover's one of the few plants in nature that can take atmospheric nitrogen and put it right down there in the ground. But an industry came up with herbicides and convinced us all that clover was a weed, sold that product, and we got rid of that source of nitrogen. It was no accident that they had bags of nitrogen chemically produced right over here to give us all that nutrient when we lost it by use of that herbicide. Didn't happen by accident. It was very clearly done that way. High nitrogen creates a dependence upon chemical pesticides. Risk assessment versus low-dose exposures, the US EPA model we've heard about. Risk assessment, those acute doses, laboratory animals extrapolated to the 150-pound male versus the new concepts that we're talking about in the science that we're hearing, how very low-dose exposures are really the concern as opposed to the acute. Human health, environment, we're looking for a reduction of inputs over time. Gone are the days when we need or should have high nutrient inputs to grow any type of plant material. The idea that less is more and that low dose combined in a very thoughtful way produces results. When we were at Uncle Matt's farm yesterday and they were talking about, or at the, not a farm, but at the citrus grove, we were talking a little bit about what they were doing. And the exact same thing that he's doing there for nutrient management in the soil is exactly the same thing that I do on a sports field or a public park. Why go organic? Because we want landscapes and places to get better, and they do. They improve. Unlike that industry that tells us if you get rid of those pesticides, everything is going to fail. Once you get rid of pesticides, managing landscapes, they improve. Alternative management, what is it? It's an adoption of a systems-based approach versus a product-centered approach. Conventional management focuses on product. Alternative management focuses on building a system, creating a healthy system, beginning with the soil. Everything begins with the soil. We heard about the mineralization in the soil. Minerals drive the bus. Absolutely true. Everything begins at that level. So conceptually, it's very different. We are a problem-solving strategy, not symptom treating. Pesticides treat symptoms. They do not solve problems. Creation of a healthy biologically active soil environment using soil testing for the basis of any input that we make. What is organic? Sometimes you hear people say, well, I'm organic, I don't do anything. To me, that is what I call organic by neglect. Organic management or alternative management means a thoughtful, proactive approach to management based on natural inputs and natural protocols. We're simply putting a series of preventative steps in place so that problems generally don't get out of control. That being said, problems can arise in any horticultural situation, but with a strong, firm, natural foundation in place, they're usually much easier to deal with. So what's driving this interest in alternative management strategy? Really, it's the concept that reduced chemical management is solution-oriented with the goal of creating and maintaining a healthy system. There's enough models in place now in the last 15 or 20 years to show that chemical-free management can produce the desired results as long as we work within that system-based approach and in that protocol framework. So what's driving it? Public perception of conventional products is changing. There is an awareness being raised out there, talking about those products. A lot of folks think that if I can go into Home Depot or Lowe's or a big box store and find these things so readily available with pallets all over the place, how dangerous can it really be? People are beginning to understand risk assessment as the flawed model, environmental, human health, new science, and we're now seeing legislation around the country in response to some of these issues. All of that begins to drive this change. We have two approaches to management. We can create natural management strategies using allowed pesticides, and there are some products that are used or allowed in organic agriculture, in organic land care, or we can choose to manage without any pesticides at all. That's the way I choose to manage. And then if something gets out of control, then we intervene, just like they did in the orange grove. There was some intervention that has to happen. It's from time to time with an allowed material. But basically, if we do things correctly, the system will take over and the system will keep things under control. Integrated pest management. Integrated pest management in structural and building is the concept that we really do want to fall back on as that really reducing pesticide. But integrated pest management in the landscape and out there in that section of the world is a flawed concept now because it has an IPM toolbox mentality. Pesticides are in that toolbox, and very often they can be the first tool out of the box instead of the last. So now we're proposing that we adopt a thought process around organic IPM, where everything is organic in all of that protocol, and if we have to reach into into sort of that bag for control, that it becomes an allowed material, either US EPA 25B exempt or something otherwise OMRI approved. So the systems-based approach is the opposite of a product approach. It's understanding how the system works and how to make it work for us. So there's the learning curve. That's something that's not taught to conventional growers, to conventional managers, and so we have a very different thought process that takes place. So the systems-based approach, if I'm managing my aspect of landscapes, is a threefold approach, and I think very similar for Lani as well. Basic understanding of soil biology, something we learned in a high school class, at some point in time, that a handful of soil is alive. Billions of organisms in there that drive that situation. Organisms that nature put there to facilitate the growth of some type of plant material. We need to accept that, to acknowledge that, and to develop programs based on that. Conventional management bypasses that. That whole concept has nothing to do in conventional management, because in conventional management, one is going from a bag, box, or bottle directly into the plant. Anything that we do in alternative strategies goes first through the soil and is managed by the soil, manipulated by the soil, created in the soil, and then is delivered to the plant. Use of product inputs based on soil testing, and then good cultural practices. Things like aeration, and if it's grass in mowing, or if it's in Lani's situation, proper grazing, proper irrigation. All of those as important, if not more important, than that bag of fertilizer that one might buy. So what do we have to look forward to in the future? In the past 10 years, an awful lot has changed. We're looking at things now. I'm actually looking at things in my end of the industry now in 2015, different than I did in 2011 or 12. Things are changing that fast. That general approach to management is beginning to really develop. The industry is changing at warp speed, but there's still a lot more to change. You still cannot get an organic, I call it an organic education. You still cannot get an organic land education at really any institution in the United States. You can grab a course here or there, but you can't go get a 4-year degree. Future legislation and tighter regulation is further going to define how we will end up moving forward. You have to remember that pesticides don't treat symptoms. That do not treat symptoms. It's not really what we're after is symptom treating. So there's no problem solving with a pesticide. So you can't say that weed is my problem, that weed is my symptom, but the pesticide will take out the symptom. But until we do something within our organic or natural program to solve that problem, that weed is just going to come back again. So we're taking this systems-based approach for structures, natural land, managed landscapes, forest. We're all about trying to solve problems, and once the problems are solved, the symptoms take care of ourselves, allowing us to create protocols that will provide the level of results, and that's really the big thing. People will say that organic means you have to settle for lower expectations. Low expectations is low product input and has a low price tag to it. Higher expectations, higher product input, higher price tag. Low expectations are not necessarily bad. High expectations are not necessarily good. It's the right expectation for the right site at the right time. And that's really what we have to hold on to, is to try to manage expectations appropriately as we're dealing with individual situations. So as we move forward here and bringing this all into perspective, consumer desires and demands are beginning to tip the marketplace. I think that's pretty evident. Things are very different now than they were even 5 years ago in folks' willingness and ability to accept some of these changes. Moving forward, I think it's very clear that we all know there will be substantial growth experienced in alternative management strategies and protocols. And I think that's what we're all in the room here are pointing towards, that we're all here because we have that common goal that we have an issue, and these strategies now will begin to grow and develop from here and get even that much more prevalent out there in the real world. So with that, I'm going to step down, and I'll switch it over for you, Lani.
Our next panelist is Lani Malmberg. Lani got the idea to offer a goat grazing service for those who did not want to spray chemicals for weed management. She has grown her business, Ewe4ic, cleverly named, Ecological Services, to 1,200 cashmere goats, working for governments and private landowners for noxious weed control, fire reduction, reseeding, watershed management, and land restoration. Thank you so much, Lani. We welcome you.
So, I started this business about 20 years ago, same time that GE crops came out. The Mr. Farmer, I forgot your first name already. Benny. He started almost the same time ago, and we as family people are, we're doing our thing, and we're still doing our thing. We're really good at it, but we don't have the giant capital corporations behind us. So GE crops went insanely wild, and I'm still by myself with my family running a business. So Chip has children on his fields. I've got kids in my pastures out here. He's in the east, I'm in the west. I cowboy things, and I love Marty because he does things kind of like I do. We just go do them. We do it our way, and we get them done. So anyway, Marty, I love how you operate. That's how I operate, too. So that's my camper over there. I have a camper, and I'm on contract every day of the year somewhere in the western United States. Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean, Canada to Mexico. Right now I'm in Mora, New Mexico, near Mora, New Mexico. We'll be moving to city of Denver, Colorado in about a week or two. If I don't like the view, I just move in my house. So anyway, started this with my two sons. The older Reggie, 32, Donnie, the younger, 31. I've got a degree in environmental restoration, botany, biology, and a master's degree in weed science. Donnie's getting an MBA right now, so we're almost the same as the team of the farmer. And this is our mission statement, is to give them an alternative to chemicals and machinery. Chemicals are just chasing symptoms. And my living herd brings life to the entire system and gets it to function so it's healthy and every piece of it can actually function. So this giant piece of machinery, when you do things with machinery, you have to have a whole bunch of them. And they're non-living. All of my herd is living. And machinery, you have to have all these different pieces, then you have to haul them over there, and then you have to haul the stuff to load them. And it's just so much machinery, so much chemicals to put in the machinery, the oil to put in there to make them go. And I have 150,000 pounds of a living energy workforce. These are my tools. They're my employees. They're self-propelled and they're edible. And they're smarter than I am. So this is how I work. And this is what they're doing. I do 12 things at the same time. Recycling all the nutrients and putting the goat poop on the soil and then bringing 4,000 hooves over the top of it to pack it in. You get that soil fertilizer contact, so it's released to the soil, like Chip was saying, or somebody was saying. It has to be in the soil so the soil can work. The soil has to be alive. They're fertilizing, they're irrigating. You get 1,000 goats a drink of water and run them up the hill, you're irrigating. You're aerating the hooves, so 1,000 head is 4,000 hooves. The speed of the herd makes different movements of the hooves hitting the ground. So getting the border collies and making the goats run, you know, they walk, they're split-hoofed animals. They walk flat-footed. If they're running, they're going like this. If I turn them with the dogs, they're going like this. So I can do all kinds of tillage. And then if I bed them down for the night, they're 102 degrees. So I have 150,000 pounds of 102 degrees bed down for the night. I can germinate seeds. I can do anything. I can do anything. So the living herd, you know, going over erosion of steep cliffs and things, I can mitigate erosion with that. They prepare the seed bed, pack the seed bed, but bringing that living energy and the life to the system is key. We pack road beds, we do road maintenance, and fire mitigation where we recycle all of the fire tinder that's a big problem in the West now. And the fuel for my herd are all the undesirable plants. So now here's a great picture. This is downtown Colorado Springs, Colorado, down there. And they brought me up here and they said, oh, we sprayed this. And I said, this is the best example I've ever seen of the miserable and expensive failure of herbicides. What you have here now is a bunch of mutated plants. This is common mullein. It's a biannual. It's just here. Last year was cheatgrass, and now it's mullein, biannual. Succession is trying to move forward. To explain it to them, I say, it's like the prep chef. The prep chef comes to chop the vegetables. Why would you kill the prep chef if you wanted dinner? You don't need to kill the prep chef. He just does his job and he leaves. The mullein comes, they do their job, and they leave. So now we have a bunch of mutated seed from a failed herbicide thing. And they say, well, so then I bring my goats and they eat all the seeds and destroy them, crunch them up and destroy them. And then they tell me, well, we can't afford your goats. Well, I just had to fix your mess. You paid the herbicide guy to come, and now you have a mess, and I've had to fix your mess and do my job. I don't think you can afford not to use them. And now, indeed, just the other day, Amazon Home Services you can hire a handyman, and they have goat grazing services on Amazon in Seattle, where you can get a goat crew. But I'm a professional grazier, and I'll do anything, well, in my section of the western United States. I haven't gone east of that line yet. And I contract with anybody that'll pay me. So federal, state, county, city, private, local, doesn't matter. And what I do is I take the natural diet preference of goats who are browsers. Cows and horses are grazers. They eat all grass. Goats are browsers. They don't like grass. It's their last choice. And I just put that to work. That's Sally the guard dog. This is on 1 million acres out in southwest Wyoming. I do a lot of oil field reclamation work. And this is, I'm on a pipeline. Coming down the pipeline, this is the electric fence I use. Babies are born on the job. When they're 1 day old, they go to work. Sometimes they're born, they're on their feet, and they go to work. And on this 1 million acres, I have 50,000 acres, and they give me a map to go to different well sites and abandoned wells, and I have the map. So these babies are born, and they follow their mamas, and we might walk 3 miles, and they all go. They play on the water truck, which is funny. They'll run the length of the water truck and then jump to the cab. Chevron brings me this water truck, and then they get on the wheel wells. It's really funny, but people always want to know about predators for me, and they always think coyotes. It's never coyotes. It's usually people, their ill-mannered children, and their ill-mannered pets. The 12-year-old boys want to play in the electric fence and throw it on the ground. Then they're throwing sticks at them, or people like to scare animals. But the predator here, anybody have a guess? Man. Well, nope. This is in the oil field. So badger holes, H2S gas is heavy, rolls downhill. These babies would get in the badger holes for shade, and their H2S gas would kill them. And that was the worst predator there. They also love playing on the oil field tanks, and they run up and down these steps and play king on the mountain. Wild horses, sometimes they run through our electric fence, following us around. This is a job on a U.S. Air Force base, very unique. I had a 10-day window to cover 120 acres. We had Dalmatian toadflax, noxious weed, Colorado butterfly plant, endangered species, and this wild iris, a poisonous plant. And they're all three right in exactly the same place, so the timing of when to be on these species at the right time was critical, and we only had 10 days to get over 120 acres, and we did it. Eating cotton down in northern Texas. Another example of their machinery versus my machinery. But this was great. Those goats would eat the whole cotton ball, and this is what fell off from the machine was laying on the ground. And goats cleaned it all up. So on succession of plants, when you start with bare ground, like in the oil field where I have to go in on an abandoned site, first you're going to see the annual weeds, then the biannuals, that's the prep chef, and then perennials, and then you'll see grass, brush, and trees. So with a herd of goats, I can push succession forward, or I can push it backward. When I'm doing fire mitigation and brush control, I start here, and I want to push it backwards. Everybody always wants me to stop at green grass. They just love green grass. So, usually they don't ever want me to push it back to bare ground. But so I push trees, brush, back to open grass. When I'm doing oil field reclamation and reseeding, we start with bare ground and push it through here to green grass. I can do anything in 3 years, anything. And here's a perfect example. This is the oil field, and this is in western Wyoming, Casper, Wyoming. And this brush, this is sagebrush. By the way, sagebrush is a natural wormer for goats. And they get all the sagebrush they can eat working in the West. So this sagebrush is so thick because of 200 years of overgrazing by cattle, bad grazing management. So here's the oil field well site. I came in and seeded this, and this is the guy's pasture. So I use my electric fence and come in here. So with my electric fence set on a couple of acres here, I'm pushing this succession forward to the open grasses and pushing this succession backwards, all in the same 2-acre site at exactly the same time. I'm doing both things right at the same time. This is where I'm at right now in northern New Mexico. Same thing, overgrazed cattle pasture in the bottom, which is the valley, and then the trees, which is the climax succession there, are very thick, and the people want to open up that valley and push the trees and the brush back. And here's a great example of, this is a mulch pile, and you saw that wood piled in the last one. They brought in big machinery. The machinery got stuck, so they have big old ruts here. The ground is all torn up, and they have the wood piles laying there, and then this is the chip and mulch pile. Think of all the different pieces of machinery coming in here at different times. And then you have all this stuff sitting around. My goats are very quiet, and they're eating, and they're recycling everything right in place, and they're self-propelled. When you have 1,000 or 1,500 head or 2,000 goats, it's a perfect balance of science and art, of the science behind of knowing who the prep chefs are, and to plant succession and the plant families and the characteristics of the plant families and the soil. It's all about soil. All I do is get the soil to work, and I must have the soil be alive. And how I bring the soil alive is 150,000 pounds of living energy. But the art is handling the animals. This is in western Colorado, another Chevron oil project, and when we moved into this job site, they said, you have 8 mountain lions and 22 bears that are right here on this hillside behind your camp. But guess what the predator was here that got us evacuated out of the canyon? Anybody? Fire. That was 2 years ago when Colorado was on fire. The key to the whole operation, one good border collie. That's all you need. And I always say that the weeds are smarter than the good plants. The goats are the only thing smarter than a weed, but really the only thing smarter than a goat is a border collie. And I think humans are about 8th under bacteria. They're lower. And then we go up to Jackson Hole and work in the most beautiful places. And this is on the most expensive, wealthiest people's golf course in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They put an ad for young people to work for summer. Nobody answered the ad. Nobody works. No young people wanted to work there, of, white kids. Nobody wanted to work, and we got the whole contract. But you have to have golfing etiquette and finesse, which I don't have, so my son did this job. And as you can see, we're fenced right on these greens. And these are very, very wealthy people. This is where Dick Cheney golfs. Whoa. So guess what the predators are here? I think Jay knows. What? No, Republicans. This is in downtown Cheyenne. July 3rd of last year I was here. Guess what the predator is here? Fireworks. Fireworks. Right before the 4th of July, fireworks is legal in Wyoming, and oh man, is that a wicked one. But of my 150,000-pound tool, they're very gentle animals. They're very polite. I use cashmere goats. They're very polite. They're very kind. They're very, very respectful. And they don't hurt anybody. As you can see here, that's my son Donnie, and this little girl wanted to feed one. And if anything goes wrong, if anything goes wrong, I get the blame, I guarantee you. Downtown Denver, XL Energy Plant. There's downtown Denver right there. What's that? Oh, is that me? Oh, does that mean stop right now?
No, you can.
Oh.
Keep going, Jim, 9 seconds.
9 seconds? Okay. Anyway, steep hillsides, erosion, use a dog fence, have to move through town. I just ran him through town like a good cowboy and a dog would do, right down the middle of the street with an orange flag. and that's how I get around. And I'll stop right there. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Jordan Brown. Jordan is the owner of Family Garden Organics Farm in Belle, Florida. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Yes, ma'am. Hey, hello. My name's Jordan Brown, and I farm organic vegetables and fruit for a living in a place called Belle, Florida, which is west of Gainesville. I don't get up and talk in front of big or medium-sized groups of people very often, and I don't do PowerPoints very often either. But I guess I was invited here to tell y'all that there is an alternative. I guess there's people like me who are producing food that people eat without the use of the nasty stuff that goes into the majority of our food. So just to tell y'all about my farm, I was not raised on a farm. I grew up in Bradenton, Florida, which is on the west coast. We moved up to Gainesville and later on over to Belle, and I started to farm 8 years ago. It's a family farm. I raise all the vegetables and everything with my family. We have 5 workers. The farm is our primary income, so that means this is what we do, 6.5 days a week during most of the year. Here's some few details. It was established in 2007 as a market garden with a few wholesale crops. 2008 and 2011, I moved into shipping vegetables across the U.S. with the help of that guy down there. Our farm started off pretty small, and I guess now it's sort of a medium-sized farm. And as we've scaled up, since the beginning, it's been certified organic. And a lot of people don't always have the right concept of what that is. People think that it's, maybe you have like mules and hoes and things like that. But we try to be efficient with what we do, and we try to. So the best way to put it, we try to keep up with technology. So as technology changes and as things develop, new information comes out, we try to keep up with it in order to stay efficient. I would like to be. Sometimes I think I would like to be maybe a little bit smaller farmer, but we have a living to make, so we have to keep on getting a little bit bigger sometimes. So we do all kind of different things. We have a CSA, which is like a subscription to our farm. We have local sales to some groceries and restaurants and things like that. And we ship vegetables. And on this past year, we grew about 30 acres of vegetables. So the principles here, we got some things laid out to honor God through hard work, integrity, and fairness. The part of that is maintaining integrity with organic certification. I feel like that there's probably in the whole process of being certified and being inspected, sometimes there's people can take advantage of being dishonest sometimes, and that's unfortunate, but sometimes it does happen. But my commitment to organic is based on the possible negative effects that pesticides can have on me and the people who are eating it and my family. A few years ago, there was a new certification came around called the Agricultural Justice Project. And the folks who were involved with that, I guess, knew me and asked me if I wanted to become certified under it. And it's sort of like a fair trade certification for American farms. And through it, we try to have a safe and fulfilling place to work and pay a living wage, treat people with respect, deal fairly, deal honestly with people. Don't engage in a lot of the manipulation that goes on with produce across the country. So along with the organic certification, maintain the AJP certification that hopefully will catch on and people realize what it is. people a lot of times are nowadays people become disconnected with their food and don't always understand how things get to the grocery store for them to buy it. And it's a lot of this bending over type activity that can wear on you. And the thing that people don't always think about is who are the people doing those activities and where do they come from. We sort of have a lack of good farm labor in the United States. That's why people come here from other countries to farm, because it's definitely hard to get Americans to do it, is what I've found. So, being certified organic, I don't know how much y'all have gotten into that so far, but it's no synthetic chemicals, only naturally occurring ones, such as, things that, like there's some products that we're allowed to use that are mined minerals that are used as fertilizer. We're always trying to build the soil. We're always trying to grow cover crops whenever we don't have anything planted, and we're trying to add things into the soil to just help the soil develop, to help the soil grow, and the microbes to have a healthy place to live and do their job in order to make the nutrients available to the plants. One of the issues in Florida is that I feel it's difficult. Coming up, you can read all kind of organic gardening books, all kind of research and things. But one thing in Florida is it's really hot and it's really humid for a good part of the year. And the way that the carbon cycles, plants, the soil is always releasing the carbon. So it's not always easy in Florida, especially with the really coarse soil that we have, to capture that carbon from the air. And so that's, in Florida, it generally means that we're having to add a lot back into the soil in order to produce the kind of the quality of produce that people would like. With a heavier soil and with less hot and rainy days, it's easier to build up the soil. Here in Florida, we're dealing with tropical weeds and pests. Those can be controlled with cultivation. Planting out, timing your planting is I feel like it's that, and selecting the right varieties to grow for your area. The things that have the built-in genetic resistance to diseases are the strongest thing that we can do to avoid having crop failure. A lot of people that want to come and grow organically have a mindset coming from conventional agriculture that says just put something else onto it and let that product work. And there is a tendency to do that, especially when it seems like there's nothing you can do to defeat whatever is coming against your crop. But looking at sort of the farm and looking at the crop and looking at, for us, we grow so many different types of vegetables and some fruit that it's a little bit easier for me to look at it as a whole, because sometimes one thing doesn't work and another thing does. But looking at it, trying to manage the soil, to maintain the integrity of the soil, to build it up by putting carbon back into the soil, goes a long way with the disease and pest prevention. And just being in the same spot for several years, you get to understand the cycles of things. You get to learn when is the best time to plant certain things for annual crops to avoid certain pest infestations. There's times when I do end up spraying the pesticides that we are allowed to use in organic, and some of them work and a lot of them don't, unfortunately. I've spent all kind of money trying out something new that I think it's going to be a solution to a certain problem that I'm having, but a lot of times it doesn't work, and we just end up going back to genetic resistance and timing the planting at the right time. We use, hopefully, going back to that picture, oh wait, there it goes. We use that plastic mulch, and people have different opinions about the plastic mulch, but I really like it. And I don't think a whole lot of organic farmers say they do, but I think a lot of them actually do. Because the thing is, you're having all that plastic, and it's all going back into the dump. which a lot of folks don't like, and I don't like that idea either. But one of the things that it does is really it helps, it covers the soil, protects from erosion, and sometimes in the wintertime warms the soil, helps with microbial activity to get the soil going and the soil doing what it needs to do. But here in Florida, one of the most important things is it helps protect the groundwater. We're using a drip line that goes underneath of that stuff. We're not wasting the water. We're not putting the water to the weeds. And we're trying to put enough water and enough nutrients, and that just to grow the crop, not to grow everything else. And having that plastic over it, even though we're going to tear it up and put it in the dump every year, having that plastic over it is going to give the plant the right, well, at certain times, give the plant the right and a better environment to grow. And at the same time, all that water and all that nitrogen as it comes from the organic to the inorganic form that the plant can take up, we're not losing it to the groundwater. And we live in a place in North Florida that's a spring recharge area. So we have a lot of first magnitude springs. Some of them aren't first magnitude any longer. But we're having some water issues where we live. And I just, I really believe in it. I think it's a good thing. You know, if we could find an alternative to it that would be able to be biodegradable would be better. So one thing I try to focus on with our farm is efficiencies. And we have the certification I talked about before. With the Agricultural Justice Project, you know, we have to pay people a living wage, which sometimes means that, well, I guess all the money isn't always coming to me. So we're trying to be more fair. We're trying to have a more equitable system, a more fair business model to go on. So that means that you really need to have people who are efficient in their work, and that means that we need to pay them. In order to pay them a living wage, they got to keep on going. Us as well. Every year I try to look back at the system and try to find different ways that we can become more efficient and cut out things that are unproductive. And on our farm, we try to have a positive work culture, which can be difficult at times. This is me and some of the guys that worked for me 2 years ago. And we're not sitting in the pool every day, but it's helpful when you do have a little bit of time to sit in the pool and just hang out with each other. And it's not just all work. We try to involve employees in the decisions that we make, overall decisions for the farm, certain things about where we're going as a business. We try to relate to them the importance of having a good harvest and doing a good job. We're trying to share the profits. I know all the folks who work for me personally, and in Florida that means that we're going to learn Spanish to be able to communicate with people. Overall, we're trying to just grow vegetables, and we're trying to make a living. And there's other folks out there trying to do the same thing. And in Florida, I always tell people that, you know, a couple of times I've had some young guys come and work for me that they want to farm. I said, well, if you learn how to farm here, I really think you can farm just about anywhere in the United States, because we've got a lot of issues. I mean, with the pests and the poor soil and the temperatures. I mean, in the middle of our season, we can get a freeze anytime. But it's possible. You know, I'm doing it. Other folks are doing it. And we're trying to do it in a way that's beneficial for everybody. One of the things that I believe in is being able to produce food that people can afford to eat. And so we're trying to make it all fit together. Being responsible with growing things right, being responsible with people, and trying to produce things at a good price. That's about it.
Thank you, Jordan. I also have a organic small farm, and we struggle with some of the same issues that Jordan was talking about. So it's interesting to hear someone also express the same concerns. Our next panelist is Ariel Lugo. Ariel is a scientist, ecologist, and director of the International Institute of Tropical Forestry within the USDA Forest Service that's based in Puerto Rico. He is a founding member of the Society for Ecological Restoration and a member at large of the Board of Ecological Society of America. Let us welcome Ariel. Thank you.
Well, it's really cool to hear all these new ways of dealing with nature, and you use pesticides because you want to control the system, and usually when you want to control the system, you wind up killing a lot of things that you probably don't even intend it to kill. So the trick is how you turn it around, and like the speakers have been talking about, is letting the system do the work for you. And what trick, the kinds of species that attract the most attention are the introduced ones. I call them introduced, but you know them by invasives is the word that is normally used, very pejorative word to describe these species. And so how about if you can turn it around and use your targets to help you achieve your objectives? And so we're in battle stations when we talk about introduced organisms. And the mantra is that you shoot first and then you ask questions later. And we're not going to argue that some of them could be problematic, but they don't have to be that way. Even the mosquitoes, as you're going to be hearing this afternoon, there are ways of dealing with them without hurting ourselves or the ecosystem. So you have to be smart, and you need to know what you're doing. Mythology is really a big problem when you're dealing with nature, incomplete information or even poor science, as it has been discussed here earlier. So you need the best science to support conservation activities that involve complex ecosystems. I have two examples that I'm going to bring you from the tropics, where we use introduced species to restore diversity. Instead of introduced species causing reductions in diversity, how do they help us? And goats are, is important. I did this on purpose after our conference call. I did it on purpose because, in the Caribbean, goats are the enemy. We eradicate goats. We shoot them because, they don't know when to stop eating. They degrade everything, particularly dry forests. And so to turn them around and then use them for conservation, I think that's a hell of a trick. And that is a very important one. And we just heard an expert. But here's another example. This is the Kirtland warbler. This is an endangered migratory bird that you only find in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ontario. And it was thought extinct, and it's very rare. And look at this specimen. You see that it has these bands on the legs. That's because it's under study. And so we started a research project with this warbird because it migrates to the Caribbean, and he was endangered in some of our national forests in Michigan. And so our scientists in Puerto Rico started studying the habitat in the Bahamas. And so from studying the bird, we discovered that the goats were actually very important. And the first time that I heard that we're going to use goats to sell an endangered bird, I just couldn't believe it. Is that these animals, they are selective, and every organism has an ecosystem associated with it. If you know how to work the animal, you can restore the ecosystem that it uses. So the goat activity selected for it turns out that this bird is not found in the pristine environments in the Caribbean. It likes trashy environments. Imagine that with goats. And so those are the kinds of environments that ecologists don't study. when an ecologist goes out to study an ecosystem, they go to look at a pristine system. And so the goat selected for this particular species of plant, which was the main food of the bird when it's migrating. And so by bringing goats and handling their grazing correctly, we could select for the plants that would feed the birds. And now if you look at the graph, the birds are taking off because there's plenty of food and using the goats. By the way, if you're if you don't like the goats, you can use caterpillars. And so they do the same. They create the environment for the bird. So here's another example. In the middle, that tree there, that's the Lignum vitae. That's a tree that is one of the first endangered trees in the Caribbean. It was really, it's ironwood, some people call it. It's very heavy wood. It's heavier than water. It sinks. And it was used in the old days, in galleons, for masts, etc. And here, this is an abandoned farm in the Caribbean, and there's 2 trees on each side of the Lignum vitae. The 2 trees are 2 introduced species that are normally called invasive. The prosopis on the left, that's cattle, moves the prosopis around, and the lucina on the right is just disperses very easily by wind. Both of them are nitrogen fixers, by the way. And what happens is that when you have degraded lands in the Caribbean, these trees are colonizers. They fix the soil. They create the conditions for the native species to come in between, after them. And so your knee-jerk reaction is to get rid of the introduced species by whatever means. But if you're patient and you let them develop a forest, then you would have native species coming in after them. And this, which is my favorite picture from a press release from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. These are Puerto Rican parrots, highly endangered birds that the Fish and Wildlife Service spends a lot of money protecting, that through research and good management in Puerto Rico, they have been able to restore the species from certain extinction. Now they have 3 populations, they have hundreds of parrots, etc., and they're liberating parrots. You see these parrots there, they have on their necks, they have transmitters so they can follow them. And so that's one branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service. The other branch is killing the introduced species. And one of the species they like to kill is the casuarina, which is a tree that grows on the beaches, creates a nice structure. It's also a nitrogen fixer. And so here's the parrots. They let them go, and where do they nest? On a casuarina tree. So the endangered parrot is using an introduced invasive for its reproduction. That's fantastic. That's what's happening in nature now. This mixture of species that you cannot anticipate which combination of species is the one that is going to be successful for your conservation objectives. So my second example has to do with the restoration of rainforests. Let's say you want to restore an incredible rainforest. That's a very difficult situation, particularly when you cut them down and you have a lot of agriculture, in this case sugarcane, and then you leave the hills deforested, eroded, abandoned. How do you restore a forest under those conditions? Well, Forest Service tried with many native species and many techniques, traditional techniques of reforestation, and they were not successful. What they finally came up with is to plant introduced species in farms with the farmer still working the land and making a deal with the farmer. Okay, here's the tree, we give you the tree, you plant the tree, you keep growing your maize and whatever you want to grow, but when the tree gets tall enough that you can no longer plant your crops, we'll find a place for you. We migrate the farmer, okay? This was done in national forest lands. And through that technique, this is the same place where I showed you before, where now the plantation is a complex, tall rainforest ecosystem with many, many species of trees. And so we did that this is with mahogany, and we did it with pine trees. But these are plantations anyway. So we got a pushback from certain sectors of society that said, well, you're putting plantations on the landscape, plantations are monospecific, not realizing, by the way, that these are not monospecific plantations, but nevertheless, you start with one species, the introduced species. You're doing this, you're sterilizing the soil, you're cutting biodiversity. So that forces you to do research. And so here you have a simple graph of the number of species through time. By the way, in 1989, a hurricane went over the forest. That's why the species richness decreases. On the y-axis is the number of species in 10 by 10, okay? This is in small plots. Lots of species. These are 3 species. On the upper line is the natural forest, let's say a 400-year-old forest, and the bottom line is the plantation. And the plantation has a lot of diversity, and it has the same dynamics with the species as the natural forest has, as for example, when the hurricane went over, and then the recovery after the hurricane. So research then shows you that you can restore diversity if you start with one species, and even if that species is an introduced species. And with the pines, do they sterilize the soil? Do they change conditions? Well, a lot of research with microbial ecology, with decomposition rates, rates of litter production, studying the organic content of the soils. All those kinds of research demonstrated that no, when you start with these species, they behave like any other tree species. If they're adapted to the site, they will develop diversity, they develop the soil, etc. And you have nice structured litter components, and you can then restore diversity starting with one species. So there you have it. Those are 2 examples, one with animals, one with plants, where you use species that are considered not very attractive because they're introduced, they're invasive, whatever label you want to give it to them. But if you're patient and you manage them correctly, you develop systems that are complex, that are diverse, and that they function perfectly well. Thanks.
Thank you so much for providing us with information, alternative options available. Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Philip Stoddard. Philip Stoddard, Dr. Stoddard, is the mayor of the city of South Miami, as well as a professor of biology at the Florida International University. He was elected mayor in 2010 and re-elected in 2012 and 2014, and is a strong proponent of community livable cities, quiet neighborhoods, responsive government, and environmental protection, leading efforts to protect beneficial species. As mayor, he has spearheaded an initiative to address mosquito-borne diseases while limiting environmental damage from over-application of broad-spectrum insecticides, designating the city of South Miami as a wildlife sanctuary in order to prevent mosquito spray by the county. Thank you so much. We welcome Mayor.
Yeah, so I wear a lot of hats. I'm still an active professor. I was teaching yesterday, and I'm also mayor as well. So when I was elected to local government, I gradually discovered that governments use every sort of pesticide possible. And I keep discovering new applications constantly. People keep saying, do you know what your people are doing? No, I've got no idea what they're doing. And I'm a mayor of the sort where you have a city commission and then the city manager. Fortunately, I managed to hire a city manager who has a zoology degree from Michigan State University, so there's some hope of explaining things to him. But they use aerial application of organophosphates for mosquitoes, truck application of pyrethroids for mosquitoes, boat applications of herbicides in the canals for aquatic weeds, cart applications of broadleaf herbicides, and fire ant insecticides for the athletic fields, and they got backpack sprayers going around and killing anything they missed. But what really got me going was the broad-scale insecticide application for mosquitoes, and it has for years. I've lived in Miami for about 22 years, and whenever they bring the planes over, they'd kill all my butterflies and my dragonflies, and it would drive me nuts. And so finally, I got to be the mayor. And I was going to say, if you don't like, over-application of insecticides and herbicides, run for political office and do something about it. Yeah. You are so much more effective in office than standing on the sidelines and grousing. You got to do it. So in the process, they're wiping out of using insecticides on mosquitoes. They take out our aerial predators, the dragonflies. And dragonflies have slower life cycles than mosquitoes. So you knock out the dragonflies, the mosquitoes come right back, and there's no dragonflies to eat them. And dragonflies are one of your two best predators for mosquitoes. That was taken in my backyard. This was also my backyard. Spiders are the other ones. And spiders work the mosquitoes pretty hard too. But again, they've got slow life cycles. So you take out the spiders with your mosquitoes, the mosquitoes come back and there's no spiders to get them. So it's pretty counterproductive to be doing that. And of course, the pollinators also get lost in the process. So we have a lot of endangered species in Miami. That's the cave crayfish that lives underneath my house, the bonneted bat, Miami tiger beetles, and Bartram's hair streak. And all of these are affected by insecticide spray. The pyrethroids, permethrin in particular, is persistent, and it concentrates in the environment in aquatic systems in particular. The bat is eating large moths that get taken out by the organophosphate aerial sprays. And these two guys are also endangered for a combination of habitat destruction and insecticide spray. So we have a religion in the eastern United States, and that is that the black salt marsh mosquito must die. Everybody hates this thing, and I hate this thing. You can't love black salt marsh mosquitoes. They truly are dreadful animals. They come at you like a nail gun. If you study mosquitoes, which I sort of do as a hobby, you can tell the mosquitoes by their behavior. This one just flies straight at you and goes bang and stabs you, and it hurts. So we've sprayed these things with everything imaginable. DDT, they became resistant to it down in the Keys. Dieldrin, resistance. Malathion, resistance. Now they're using 2 more insecticides, and I swear they're going to become resistant to them too. And if you look in the literature, you find that resistance is already beginning to emerge to the new insecticides in various parts of the world. So it's coming. You can't spray fast reproducing insects and not have them become resistant. We all know this. And so if you remember Country Joe and the Fish from Woodstock, there's a little variation on their song, the Vietnam Rag. But they spray them every possible way they can. Interestingly, tires, there's a dead simple way to keep mosquitoes from breeding in tires. Anybody know what it is? No, easier. No, easier. Don't import tires. You fill them full of sand. You just dump a few buckets of sand in there so the water can't stand. That's all it takes. I learned that in Uruguay. But tires are really tough unless you just throw a little sand in them. Real low tech, not toxic. Works great. But this is the new weapon in the arsenal. It's Nail It. It's a potent organophosphate. You probably know organophosphates were developed originally as nerve gases for military use, but they've been adapted for more or less the same thing against the evil black salt marsh mosquito. And the companies that make this under the name of Dibrome is what they use in Miami. They'll swear up and down it doesn't harm non-target insects, but they'll brag about how it kills moths. Huh. Okay, so you're trying to tell me it kills the moths you want to kill, but not the ones you don't want to kill. I got that. Well, I also have a colleague at FIU, Gary Rand, who's a toxicologist, and Gary, under contract with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, discovers that Nail It is acutely potent against larval butterflies, i.e. caterpillars that eat the foliage, and it's acutely potent against butterflies, the adult forms. These papers just came out this year. They were a little slow because they were dealing with the Deepwater Horizon issues. So, we've also got the city applying, these herbicides to the fields and everything else, and I'm thinking, man, can't we just stop? I forgot to mention this one. This is the Schaus swallowtail, which is now critically endangered. And is critically endangered because of nailed. It somehow managed to survive the DDT and the dieldrin and the malathion, but when they switched to nailed, they wiped it out. And it's had a real hard time recovering. Hurricanes don't particularly help. But the nailed was absolutely potent against this thing. Why can't we find a better way to do this? You know, there has to be a better way to do this. And so when you start looking for ways, this comes back to the talks you've heard earlier today, you need to understand the biology of your pest organisms. And you need to know the people's habits and their past practices. These are the biases. This lovely quote by Einstein about common sense. It's nothing more than a deposit of prejudices laid down in the mind before you turn 18. The local government has to know the alternatives. Today I learned about using goats in lieu of broadleaf herbicides. Can you imagine what my city manager is gonna say when I tell him about this on Monday? Steve, you got to get goats. He's going to say, what? Yeah, you got to get goats, Steve. Oh, great. He'll love this. You need to educate. Does anybody know a goat herd in Miami? Yeah, they're out west. I understand. No, I've got a friend with goats. So I'm going to have to talk her into it. The public has to have the right values and education level, and you'll see some stuff. I'm talking this afternoon later on about mosquitoes, and I'll show you some letters I got from city residents, and you'll see some real interesting things in the education levels. And interestingly enough, there's even legislative impediments, which sounds like isn't going to come to a shock to this crowd, given what I've heard today. So I set out trying to do it. I said, heck, I'm the mayor. Here's my chance. You know, I've been railing against this stuff for years. Nobody listens to me. Let me see what I can do. So, I called up the mosquito control folks and said, could you not spray? And they said, no. Go away. But I'm not, and I'll be talking more about the mosquitoes later on this afternoon. So if you're interested in hearing that story in some detail, I'll give it to you more there. But I want to just talk about some of the methods that we have been employing in the city of South Miami. And I noticed last summer we had an awful lot of Aedes aegypti. This is the yellow fever mosquito that carries, in addition to yellow fever, which we don't have anymore, dengue, which we are getting locally acquired cases in Florida now, and chikungunya, which is arguably worse, if not lethal. It sure makes you feel worse. And we're getting locally acquired cases of that, just a few of them now. And we had a heck of a lot of Aedes aegypti around the neighborhood, and I swear there is no standing water in my yard except for my pond, which is full of mosquito fish, so it wasn't coming from my yard. And I'd raided my neighbors' yards and couldn't find anything there, and a friend of ours in this house here says, actually this house here starts mentioning to me something about a derelict swimming pool. Can you see it? It's that one right there. This is a canal. That's full of fish, no mosquitoes. But that. So I got the clean pool over on the left, and in yellow is the derelict swimming pool. That house belongs to a surgeon who's kind of weird. The place is sort of, he has his hurricane shutters up all the time, and he does not take care of his pool. So my wife sneaks over there and discovers that it's seething with mosquitoes. She drags a bucket through it, brings it home, and I put them under the microscope. Oh my God, Aedes aegypti out the wazoo. So my wife sneaks over with buckets of mosquito fish, climbs over his fence, and throws them in the pool. She's an architecture professor, but she does things like this. I love her. And so she puts these little mosquito fish in there, and in about a week's time, we have no more Aedes aegypti. Took care of it. Wow. Yeah, it was great. That was the neighborhood supply. Now, these are girls in the Philippines that are putting our eastern mosquito fish, Gambusia affinis or Holbrooki, into the storm drains in the Philippines. This is an invasive exotic. Everywhere else in the world, but in Florida, they're native. And so I take them around to people in little yogurt cups and put them in their storm drains or give them to their kids to drop in the storm drains. Works great. I mean, the county comes around and poisons things. I got kids dropping them in the storm drains. Everybody calls up the mayor and says, Mayor, how do I get mosquito fish? I say, come on by, and I give them a yogurt container full. This little devil And this is one of our other nuisance species, not very well known, but it's Ewe4ic is the genus, and we have a couple of species, Mitchellii and Vanduzii. They breed in bromeliads. They're also known as pitcher plant mosquitoes because up north that's where they breed. They got these very pretty white larvae. If you take the turkey baster and you suck this stuff out of the bromeliads, it comes up seething with them. And so I went around the city last summer with my turkey baster, taking the dog for a walk, sampling bromeliads. They all are full of these wretched things until I got to one yard. And there's this British lady, Penny, who has a yard covered with bromeliads and no mosquito larvae. And I said, Penny, what are you doing? You're the only person in Miami who's got bromeliads and no mosquitoes. She says, oh, have you tried mosquito bits? I said, no, what are they? And this is something you can get on Amazon.com. It's got Bt toxin in it. And she puts a couple little crumbs up in that little center thing, and the rain trickles it down to the other ones, and she's got no mosquitoes. But she's got nematodes in there. I sucked them up. So it's not killing everything. It's just, you know, partial to certain insects. And of course, we know a lot about Bt toxin. It's from a soil bacterium. Also lives in the guts of certain insects that are resistant. But it applied specifically to one plant, it doesn't contaminate the soil and does a great job of taking out these mosquitoes. Down in Key West in 2009, they had a huge dengue outbreak. 10% or 15% of the population became seropositive. And, you know, so of course they did all the usual stuff of going around spraying, and they sent people into people's yards to empty out the water dish and so forth for the dog and turn over wheelbarrows. But they've, and then they fumigated everything with everything they could find. Could have just used sand, but this was way more fun. So they've recently contracted with Oxitec to release the transgenic mosquitoes. Now I hear various mutterings. Now I'm a huge fan of these things, and I'm going to explain to you why. You know, I'm a zoologist, and I understand the transgenics. And it is, I think, one of the most clever and beautiful applications of transgenics for the betterment of the environment that I've ever seen. And it's a very interesting system. So what they do. So you know how sterile male techniques work? Sterile male release. This is a very common technique. Typically you take a bunch of insects of a species you don't like, you irradiate them, sterilize the males, and you release them, and then the males distract the females without producing offspring. They mate, but they don't produce kids. So this is a variation on the sterile male technique. So you release a whole lot of sterile males. But they're not sterile per se. Instead, they've got this transgene. And what the gene does is it's not being expressed in them. It's expressed in their kids. And it's a normal mosquito gene. They just make too much of it. And so it kind of causes things to go out of balance, and the young don't develop. And so you can keep that gene turned off in the lab by raising them on tetracycline. But when you release them and they breed in the wild with the females, their kids don't have access to tetracycline, so they overexpress a normal mosquito gene. It keeps the transcriptional machinery turned on, so they can't make the normal proteins they're supposed to make, and they don't develop properly, and they die. And the gene can't move between species, in fact, because it's specific to this one. It's got a reporter gene, so they can track it pretty easily. And we're dealing with, you know, killing an invasive exotic mosquito, Aedes aegypti. It's an old world species. And it's not toxic. There is no pesticides released in the environment. There is no organophosphates. There's no permethrin. It's specific to one species. And it's exactly what we need to be releasing. It's expensive. That's the only problem. And Oxitec has pointed out that if we use fewer insecticides, this will allow more beneficial predators and insects to flourish. It's absolutely correct. So it is a lovely application of transgenic technology for doing exactly what we want to be doing. And I saw that the anti-GMO folks have got this very hysterical poster that they've been putting out and threatening not to come to Florida. Well, don't come to Florida. That'd be all right. You know, we've got enough people in Florida already. But they say not proven safe. Well, it's a heck of a lot safer than nail it. You know, so, you know, not proven safe. It's pretty safe. I mean, it's only killing one mosquito, and it's the one you want to get rid of. And this is your alternative.
So has it been tested among all those other species that you mentioned about the
Well, it's
organophosphates?
tested among them. Tested
Against it, because you said it's safe, and it's safe.
Well, it's tested on one species exactly. That is to say, if I were to release, imagine I were to release guinea pigs, and you said, well, I'm worried about those guinea pigs breeding with my goats. I'd say, don't worry about guinea pigs breeding with your goats. And this is the same sort of thing here. You've got one species, they don't hybridize with any other species, and that gene isn't going to move. It's in this one thing, and besides, it doesn't propagate in the wild. It can't, because it's a dead end. It goes exactly, you know, one generation and stops. So it can't persist in the wild on its own. It's which means you have to keep releasing them. You release them, they last for 2 weeks. The end of the cycle is in about a month. That's that. And then you got to do it again, which is why I say it's expensive. But it's not something that gets into the environment and persists or can jump between species the way we're worried about with some of the weed species and plants.
So what happens if insectivores or reptiles or other animals consume those GE mosquitoes?
They're tasty, apparently. They're just overexpressing one of the mosquito's own natural proteins. So if you like eating mosquitoes, they won't taste any different. They're not nutritionally any different than an ordinary mosquito.
What about epigenetic impacts?
Epigenetic impacts meaning what?
Generational impacts down the line.
There are no generational impacts down the line because they don't propagate down the line. And if you're trying to mess up Aedes aegypti, you know, I'd love it if you could find a better way to do it. This is the best one I've ever seen. The only problem with it is the price, and it's a bit of work because they don't have an automatic screening mechanism to separate the males from the females, so it has to be done by hand, which is slow and laborious. Now, we come to Florida, and Florida's legislation. So they require, this legislation apparently has been read by the mosquito control districts to say they have to spray anytime anybody complains. And I noticed the words may be as opposed to shall be subject to control. And if there's any lawyers in here, you know what that difference means. But they've really tried to thwart us from stopping insecticide spraying. But I noticed that we have the ability. It's been done in the Florida Keys here. These areas in red are no spray zones. They've been designated biologically sensitive, environmentally sensitive, and they're not spraying there. So it's been done in Monroe County down in the Keys. And then we have a municipality up in Broward County called Coconut Creek that has Butterfly World in it, and they've got a spray ban within 2 miles of Butterfly World to prevent aerial insecticide drift. So it's been done. So I tried it. I said, heck. So this is a longer story of how I got to this point. But we did pass an ordinance that prohibits the introduction of the public airspace of broad spectrum insecticides. And I'm in sort of what I think are the latter stages of this battle. But ultimately, it has to be a combination of stopping insecticide use and using other methods in order to control the mosquitoes. And what I can tell you is that since we stopped the aerial spraying in South Miami, the insects that I like, the pollinators and the aerial predators, have rebounded very nicely. And so I've been very pleased with that. So that's what I got to say for you today. And I'm going to go look into goats, and you can all chase me around the block about the transgenics, but I'd be happy to take any time necessary to explain it, because your questions are pretty good ones, and they're the sort of questions people ought to be asking.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Very interesting. Thank you so much. Well, this ends our session, and I appreciate your interest and your questions. Thank you so much.